often feel like I'm written out or ignored, and sometimes I was there and a part of things, and kind of dismissed, kind of erased. Not so much now, but years ago, I really felt it. That I thought,
I guess,
hold on, I was a part of that, and I was there, and I was involved. And I'm completely, and I don't think I fit the narrative somehow, because I don't fit all Hacienda stuff, because that's all after me. I tried to tell Tony not to do the Hacienda. I said, don't do it. I tried to stop the 80s happening, basically, with Hacienda, the lot. I tried to stop it and failed. There you go. Anyway, I digress slightly.
Yeah.
Yes,
So you yourself,
I'm originally from Leicester, and I was quite isolated in my own sort of like little Leicester hermit cell or something, doing tapes in my bedroom, really, and messing about with friends, making bedroom tapes and things like that, larking about. That's pre-factory. There's not a lot to say.
What kind of music were you into at that point in time? Just sort of the mid-70s underground, or sort of bit of folk, bit of prog as well, mixing in there as well?
I was very diverse. I loved things like Dylan and Neil Young. I loved things like Unhip, kind of Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, all those sort of things that were happening. Bowie, and but I had a lot of 60s stuff, because I had an uncle, my mum's younger brother, who was only 6 years older than me, and he bought lots of records. And I used to go round to see him. And it was literally every weekend I went round to see him and what was the latest records he'd bought. And he bought loads of albums. And so I was listening to things like Dylan and Hendrix when I was like 9, 10 years old, and taking it in, not always understanding it, but it stayed with me. And I was an enormous Beatles fan. I even joined the fan club while the Beatles were together, which shows how old I was. And I loved that late end Beatles, from Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour to White Album to Abbey Road to Let It Be. That was my Beatles era. And I loved all the things that were happening with John and Yoko. And, it was a huge effect on me.
Did that seem very distant from Leicester, or did Leicester have some kind of pop culture going on as well at the same time, or did it just seem like a culture from outer space, like from when I was growing up in Blackpool?
Like a lot of cities, really, that there was a lot going on that I wasn't that aware of or part of at the time. In any city of any reasonable town of any reasonable size, people are inventive and thinking different, outside the box, and they're creating things, and often many of those things don't become that well known or that exposed. They don't get that much further than where they are, but people were definitely doing things, and I'm aware now that there were things happening. But I was quite isolated from it. I didn't really. I sound like I never went out. I didn't know a lot of other musicians and stuff from that time. I did a little bit later, and I found out, for example, years later, things like Crazy Head. You remember them?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know Kevin was in them. Kevin, who was in them, Kev Reverb. I went to County Salt College in Leicester with him. He was in a couple of years younger than me. And I didn't know he was in Crazy Head until they had records out, and that was I saw him on a poster. I literally was walking through Leicester one day and saw this great big Crazy Head poster, and there he was in his leathers and everything. Like, God, that's Kev. So that's how little I knew, of things at times.
So did you start playing in a pre-punk Leicester? Were you out doing any kind of gigs?
No. The only things I did were at County Thorpe College, where I went, and I hung on by my fingernails there until I was 19. I went there 14 to 19. And I mention it as significant because it was a very experimental place at that time. We had a lot of outside pressure to close it down or change the system because it was very free and very exciting time. And I'm afraid I spent a lot of time getting drunk. I fell in love with alcohol and getting drunk and making weird noises. So I didn't do proper gigs as such, no. I was very inexperienced at the time of Factory and everything.
So how did you make that connection with Factory then? I mean, had you actually played any gigs at that point, or were you just making home demos all the time?
I hadn't, like I say, I hadn't played gigs as... I sent a cassette in. It's hard to believe. I'd tried all the labels like Stiff and Radar happening at the time, and had rejection letters. John Peel didn't seem to especially like what I did, much to my despair. I'd been a huge John Peel fan since about 1969, and you think when you send your tapes in, the fairy story is going to happen and you're going to get a John Peel session. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I never got the feeling that he was that keen on what I did. And that carried on through the years, right up to the time he passed away. I never got the feeling he was that keen on what I did. And I was very disappointed in that. It's up to him, it's his taste. But I was such a Peelite as well, Mm-hmm. So Factory, it sounds crazy. I sent a tape in and they played it and liked it. It must have been sheer luck, because as I've often said to people, the Palatine Road flat, there were bin bags full of cassettes. Can you imagine how many cassettes you can get in a bin bag? Hundreds. And so there were 3 or 4 bin bags full of cassettes. So there must have been, a couple of thousand. And also, while I was there, I was there when the postman came, and there'd be loads of jiffy bags through the door. So they had tapes and they could possibly cope with listening to. So how they picked mine out, I don't know.
Who's your champion at Factory? Would it be Tony?
Tony championed me a lot, yeah. Alan was very kind to me as well. Alan often doesn't get mentioned enough and is a lovely laid-back guy, never rattled by anything. Whereas, of course, Tony was much more exciting, excitable, flapping his arms around and stuff, and much more than obviously the media face of Factory. But Tony seemed to be the one that had a thing about me, I mean, also, it's that thing as well that you always get this image of these mythical times that everybody was sort of in the room at the same time, and they weren't. For example, I never met Peter Saville until 2008. Yeah. Saville was an integral part of the Factory story, and yet I never met the guy until years and years later. Very nice guy, but it was just not. I was just not there at the same time as him. Wherever he was.
I've always had the feeling that you're closer to Tony's real musical aesthetic than Joy Division were, because he did like that kind of singer-songwriter, whatever you want to call it. That was more his thing, wasn't it? He's a big Joni Mitchell fan, big Springsteen fan. That's more
Yeah.
Tony's taste, really, isn't it? So, would you think that's true?
Well, I mean, he did do this hype line that I was the most exciting. I think he said English, because people would do that, not including the whole country. The most exciting English songwriter since Elvis Costello, which is a bit scary, to say things like that. But I think he did have that thing about it, yeah. And I was kind of true to the original Factory aesthetic, though I don't really fit it at all. I don't think I was. I think I was not seen to fit it, and kind of got punished accordingly, because I got a pasting in the press. Once I got a couple of sympathetic write-ups. Mark Ellen in NME reviewed me and Joy Division playing together in London, and he gave me a better write-up than he did Joy Division. And when I read stuff like that at the time, of course, I was shocked, because I really loved Joy Division as a band, and B, it got you thinking the delusion thing, that wow, I'm gonna really break through, I've got Mark Ellen in NME saying how great I am and everything, and wrong could I be? Because of course, then I got absolutely obliterated by the press. They either ignored my existence, or if they noticed me, they gave me a right pasting.
Was there any sense of any kind of aesthetic of Faction when you joined? Because you're there so early, it hasn't become the label that it becomes famous for, has it?
No, there's a lot of things about Factory that hadn't happened, especially the Hacienda, because the Hacienda is really where I faded out from things.
I'm talking even before that, the Joy Division sort of Hannett era, and you worked with Martin Hannett yourself. But was there any idea when you went first time you went up to meet Factory, they're kind of honing in on a house style? It's more eclectic when you're there. They don't really know what they're going to be, do they?
I suppose even I thought, though, that I was a bit odd man out. The first Factory gig I ever appeared at was February 1980, and it was the New Osborne Club in Manchester. And there was Joy Division, a certain ratio, Section 25, and me. And I obviously felt rather different to everything else, but I got an instant affinity with, who I'm going to say, Section 25, as people and everything, instant connection. They were the only people that night who were particularly friendly, as I call it. I mean, and I really connected with Vin and with Larry and with Paul, because Paul Wiggin was in the band then. I really liked them as people. I loved what they did.
Amazing.
I think they were one of the greatest live bands of that era. They're really underrated. I thought they were fantastic when they played. And as people, they were straight away really welcoming and warm. And do you know what? That stayed ever since. Vin, obviously I still connect with him, and we've still done gigs together. And I'm in contact with Paul Wiggin again, which is great, through Facebook.
Facebook, bizarrely, isn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, because of course Paul became the mystery man who vanished into the ether. And he's back. It's great.
Yeah.
And miss Larry terrible. I miss Larry awful. Larry and I got to talking a lot. He used to phone me a lot, actually, at 3-4 in the morning. He'd phone you and then talk about an hour and hang up the phone. Then he'd phone you back again. Maybe he went for a wee or something, I don't know. But he'd ring you back again out of nowhere with something else to say or ask you. And so I got to talking to Larry a lot in the last few years. I'm very glad I did. And I'm very glad of all the time I spent with him. If ever you did a gig and stayed at Larry's, of course, you knew you weren't so much going to bed as staying up all night listening to him, grilling you and asking you loads of questions. And now, of course, it's precious. When I think back to all the time I spent with Larry and all the times I was going, Larry, it's 5 a.m. I'm bushed. I mean, I'm just glad I did. It was so amazing. I miss him so much.
Yeah, I got to know him a bit better towards the end. I mean, we were just a couple of years younger, so to him, we seemed like little kids when we started having bands. But I remember Paul Wiggin in the mid-'70s when he was a biker going down my road with really long hair and things. And you must have met Fez Parker as well, who's a friend of mine.
Matt.
Yeah. He was part of that because he'd known Paul since the 60s, hasn't he? So this is all kind of Blackpool kind of hippie beatnik madness.
Well, yeah, but it must have been a great scene, and you had all those things emerge like Section 25 and Tunnel Vision, and I used to hear about it and think it sounded really interesting. I must say Leicester perhaps lacks that connection, or I didn't connect to the right people. I've no doubt there were people doing those things, but I don't know quite who they were or where it happened. It was different. Leicester didn't quite get that feeling of a scene to me, but I might have been out of it.
Yeah, you're making this connection now via factories. It's kind of different again, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Weird things happening to me, like people coming up to me at gigs and parties and asking me could I get them Joy Division T-shirts and Joy Division badges. And of course, Factory didn't cash in on any of that at the time.
No.
There was loads of what you would call bootlegging. And I mean, there's lots of things that Factory didn't pursue. They just let it happen. It was very chaotic and disconnected and disorganized. And how everything fell into place is a miracle, because it's true, it was all done in a kind of a very random fashion.
I think if the one thing they did get right was signing up like game-changing bands. I mean, if you got a Joy Division, everything else is going to carry with it, isn't it, I guess?
It's true, yeah.
The downside is you didn't take advantage of it to make Section 25 a really, really big band because they were as good.
But they had a very inspired run early on, because I mean they got a certain ratio. I mean, and still going strong and still making great music. Section 25 still exists through many members and lineups, but there still is a Section 25. Obviously, Joy Division never foresaw what was going to happen, and then becoming New Order and how that developed. So that was a fairly inspired initial group of people. Of course, to Rutty Column, Vinnie Riley. So that was pretty amazing group of people, really. Some would say it stops being amazing with things like me, but I don't agree with them. But
no, it does have a logic to it. So I mean, so did you get to know Joy Division better towards, after that first gig, or was it always like, were they in a different sort of space?
No, and they never acknowledged me, spoke to me or anything, and I was too shy at times to speak to them. I had a couple of good chances of talking to Ian, but I've got to say, I mean, I've been alone in a dressing room with Ian, but he didn't acknowledge me. There was none of that eye contact and, all right, mate, and I was rather in awe of him and didn't speak. I didn't get to speak to them or them speak to me until after Ian passed away. And then...
you did a track with them, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a track with them, yeah. Well, in fact, it was the first thing they ever did as New Order, was record me. That's the first track they ever recorded, though I've never been forgiven for that by some people. But there you are.
How does that work? if you never spoken to them, or had you spoken to them a little bit by then, or?
No, that day was the first time we actually spoke.
So was that like Tony doing one of his kind of concepts? Let's put these people together, see what happens.
There was a huge disorganisation about it. Tony rang me the night before. It was the days of phone calls and, landlines. And he said, I was doing the studio the next day. And he said, would you like the JDs to back you up? And when he said the JDs, I went, what? Joy Division? Like a fool. And he went, yeah. He says, it had been a month after Ian had passed away. And he said, they're thinking of carrying on, he says, and they need something to do to try it out, and get the feeling again. And thought it would be a good idea if they worked with you. So that was it. I knew the night before. There was no rehearsals, which shows, to their credit, they really worked on what we did. They really tried to encourage me. And I was inexperienced in a recording studio and somewhat like, wow, they're Joy Division. And they were still Joy Division as such then. Peter Hook actually said about a meeting with the manager. He went and we've decided on a name last night, New Order. So the night before, they'd decided on New Order. So I would say my inexperience in the studio showed. They tried their best with the material, but it was totally unrehearsed. And then Martin Hannett appeared to produce the track. And I gather the story now is he'd been recording John Cooper Clarke's album, and they'd been up for 3 days and 3 nights. So he was completely wasted. And of course, I was as green as green. He lay down under the mixing desk and fell asleep. And
He's famous for that one. Yeah.
I didn't think things like that happened in recording sessions, so I was completely thrown by it. And his only comment was, it sounds like something by Fairport Convention, which, of course, I thought at the time he was being insulting in a punk rock way. And I learned years later that Martin was a big folk fan and loved things like that. So he actually meant it in a positive way. And I didn't understand that, appreciate that at the time. So, I mean, the track that came out, which has just been reissued actually on the From Brussels with Love compilation that came out on Crepuscule. They've done a beautiful reissue with a beautiful book. It is lovely, 40th anniversary. But my track with New Order on that, it really was never mixed and mastered or rehearsed. So that's my excuse. But I must say it is disappointing. And it's not New Order's fault. It's my fault.
I'm amazed how you got it to work to the point it does work, because musically you're very different styles. I mean, how does a conversation even go when you're dealing with somebody like you who writes songs acoustically, and you're dealing with a band whose songs are built around lead bass lines? I mean, how do you find a communality? How does that work?
Well, I wrote the song actually playing electric guitar, so I did have an image of it being that. They put a lot of work into it and a lot of thought, as much as work and thought as they put into a new song by themselves. I guess it's the same thing. Somebody comes in with something, or they make something up in the studio, and work on it. Yeah. And if anything, I got the feeling of Peter Hook being the glue that bound it together. And I liked Steve, who's very quiet, as you'd know, and Bernard is, you don't quite know how to take Bernard sometimes. Sometimes I don't know if he was being humorous or if he was being, I don't know.
Dry.
I mean, yeah, I don't know, and I never got to know him well enough, really. Whereas, obviously, Peter Hook, I've done gigs with him through the years ever since, and I really got on with him that day. I really liked him. I was a big admirer of his bass anyway, and his contribution to the band. And then years later, I got to do gigs with him with Revenge, and then with The Light. I've done quite a few with The Light.
Yes.
And so obviously I've more times and got to know him better and been in contact with him. I mean, I've not been in contact with Bernard or Steve for many, many years, since the 80s. So Peter's the only one I know, really.
You'd worked with Martin Hannett before this as well, hadn't you?
No, that was
the only first time. Yeah.
But I met Martin quite a few times after, and he was really nice to me. We really got on well. And, you know, like he got me on the guest list for Birmingham when he played with John Cooper Clarke and Pauline Murray. And so I got backstage then and things like that, you know. And I found him very funny. You know, again, a really nice guy. Again, I never got to have, you know, a deep conversation with him of great length. But I did meet him those few times. It was very, very, very positive. I really liked him. I wish I'd have got to know him better now. And, you know, then you didn't get to know about things instantly like now with the internet. I learned a lot about what happened with Martin years later. I didn't even know he died for a long time, till a long time after he died. News just didn't travel necessarily then. If you didn't read things in the music press, or if it didn't get reported, or so I was very sorry to hear he died. And then I learned more about what happened with him, and I was very sorry to learn what had happened with him. I wish I'd have got to know him better.
So with Martin, when you're working with him that time, was he applying some of his famous production techniques to the track, or was it just more of a straight recording because he'd fallen under the table?
He didn't apply anything. And they tried to record me solo acoustic, because the idea was then the factory quartet that was going to be 2 10-inch albums. So you were thinking of probably about 12 to 15 minutes of music, roughly. So the idea was I did a song or two with what was to be New Order, and 2 or 3 on my own. And I was so nervous I couldn't get a finished acoustic take of any of the songs. But again, we're talking of inexperience. I'd hardly done any gigs. I was really inexperienced. And that kind of pressure shot where literally everybody's almost stood in the control room like this with arms folded, and you're in there with your acoustic guitar like Bob Dylan or something. And it was a mess. It was a mess. The whole day wasn't long enough, really. And I wasn't relaxed enough. I was too anxious. And it got a bit difficult later because, there was the incident where Bernard was doing a guitar solo on one song, and he started doing the boredom riff and playing the, obviously like, in other words, I'm bored. And he threw his guitar on the floor and walked out. And of course, that's fine between bands with arguments and stuff and people showing temper. But for me to be witness to it, it kind of felt wrong. And of course, people, that Lou Reed line, those were different times. I think there was that thing, they've said it now, that after Ian, it was like, okay, that's very, very sad and upsetting now. Pull yourself together, lads, and get on with it. A bit like the war, I suppose, because people had to do it in the war. But I realise now the kind of grief and the feelings they were going through that day, and it was only a month before, and to have me there and me and my issues and whatever, obviously I could have been irritating to them or whatever, I don't know. But I was aware of the magnitude of what had happened, but perhaps it wasn't as well understood as we understand it now. And we talk about our feelings more now, I hope. We don't bottle feelings, especially men, like we used to. And, we've got memories of a culture that would be alien to younger people of what it was like my memory in the 60s and the 70s, and how men and women were supposed to behave. And so I think there was a lot of those issues then. Yeah.
So with the other characters around Factory, you talked about Alan Erasmus before. Was he quite a key player in the early days? I mean, creatively.
The famous line is nobody quite understands what Alan did. I don't know what Alan did, but he did it very well. He was like a vibes person. No doubt he could say how hard he worked and how much he did. I mean, his flat was, of course, Palatine Road. So that was the office that wasn't, early on, didn't have any resemblance to an office. It was just a flat, but it was just a flat with loads of boxes of albums in. And then later on, there was a room just full of stuff like stock and on shelves, because it was more going that way, a big catalogue and much more demands, obviously. But yeah, he had the bags of demo tapes in a corner, all in the bin bags. He had all that going on. It was the address. I used to stay there a lot. When he wasn't there, I used to be on my own there a lot. In fact, me and my dad that stayed there once. My dad had driven me to a gig and we stayed overnight. And so I did quite a few gigs with Durruti Column. And when the lineup settled as Vinnie and Bruce Mitchell, and of course that was great because we'd get in a van, there'd be me and Vinnie, the sensitive artists, and Bruce doing all the work, driving, organising. I mean, Bruce was like tour manager, roadie, he was everything. Bruce is an extraordinary man.
Still doing the same. Yeah.
Sorry?
Still is. He's still out there doing the same thing.
Oh, yeah. I know he's still out there. Bruce is fantastic. And he's an amazing man to spend time with and talk with. He's so well read and so knowledgeable. He's just got a vast knowledge of life and a great sensitivity with people. So I love Bruce very dearly, still to this day. A marvellous man. And again, he was the glue that held the whole Durruti Column thing together and really made it possible for Vinnie to do what he did, live, certainly. We went up to Scotland and played Glasgow and Edinburgh, and quite amazing. What
was Tony like?
What was Tony like?
Yeah.
Extraordinary. There's a side of him that was very affectionate, and funny if we're talking about how people more bottled feelings up and stuff back then, 40 odd years ago, and Tony was very, very affectionate and very lively and very enthusiastic, but then I found very argumentative, and we had quite a few arguments about things I did or said. He was furious with me for supporting CND and going on CND marches, and I was going on about can't do a record for CND and stuff, and he went nuts.
What? Why was that?
He was going on about nuclear, nuclear missiles are a good thing, and it was kind of the Thatcher era was just sort of obviously very new then, and he seemed quite positive about Thatcher. Might surprise people, but he certainly argued a lot with me about it, and of course I said things sometimes that he took issue with. I once said about buying U2, Boy, which I think is a great debut album. It's a great album, and he goes, "Oh, U2, they're phonies. They just want to be rock stars like anybody else," and he was really telling me off for buying a U2 album. But I loved him very much, and he believed in me. The only thing is, I could feel his enthusiasm for me, and I felt a bit of negativity from a certain ratio. And I realised before I'd come along, certain ratio had been the thing that he'd gone on about to people and been excited about. And then he started doing it in the other way with Stockholm Monsters, who, no disrespect, but I didn't get Stockholm Monsters at all. I didn't get them musically or anything. Always people, when I met them, they were really blank, seemed very unfriendly. They were very young, so I apologise. I would not wish to cause any offence to anybody all these years on. But the thing is, Tony seemed to get tired of me, and as he got to know me, my issues and things, and he seemed to divert his attention towards Stockholm Monsters. And so I felt it move on. No doubt Stockholm Monsters then felt it as his attention moved to something. He had a new thing that he had to be excited about,
Yeah.
And
so when you had talks with him, what was his vision for you? Did he have an idea what you were? A concept, an idea, or did you just pretty well left on your own to just pursue your own ideas?
I had very little grasp of how things worked. So I grew impatient about the long gaps between factory projects, or they seemed long then. They probably don't seem so long now. But, we did that one session with New Order, and then I didn't go in a recording studio again for over a year. And I, of course, thought that was wasting time. I even took it in my own hands. I recorded with The Sound, with Adrian Borland and The Sound in London. We did some stuff together, and I gave Tony the tape, and of course, again, the reaction was totally negative. I've said, I've recorded something that could be a single. It's with Sound. And he was going, I'm not having any fucking London band on Factory, straight away. That was his reaction. And so I did record some stuff myself and give it to him, and he turned it down. And of course, the other thing that we had big arguments about was the Factory Quartet, where he decided in the end, because the studio session hadn't been a great success, he asked me for live tapes. And I'd done a tour with Roy Harper, and they'd done reel-to-reels each night I found that they'd got a reel-to-reel machine, and the crew, who were great, were willing to record, put a reel on while I was on stage and record me from the desk. So we had real live album quality stuff. And I made the mistake of giving Tony all the tapes with the go so many minutes in here and this version of this song, so on. And he ignored that and just picked on a very bad gig at Leeds University where I'd had 20 minutes of hell of people shouting abuse at me. And then you hear me break, and I think there's 11 Fox in 2 minutes. a long time since I've listened to it. So the first thing you hear me is on and on and on at this audience. What you don't hear is the 20 minutes before that had sort of goaded me into this unfortunate reaction. But the trouble was, he put that out on a record. Maybe he thought it was acoustic KO, like Iggy and the Stooges' metallic KO. It was my acoustic KO. But it didn't work. It didn't work. And also, the songs weren't really properly realised. The lyrics and the whole arrangement of the songs now, I'm very critical. I can hardly bear to listen to it now. It's very hard to listen to. And I was kind of a half-cooked talent. You know what I mean? I'd got something. I could write songs. I could write words and music, but they weren't developed right. And ironically, I could have done with more sessions. Obviously, this all costs money, though. I could have done with more sessions with Hannett, where maybe Hannett would have shouted at me and made me cry and stuff, but whipped me into shape with everything. And we'd have a very different story now. This interview would be very different. You know, because I have noticed how a lot of people around that time now are like millionaires or something, or whatever they are, and I'm not, which is obviously the way things go and is my own fault. But you know, it's
your fault because you were true to yourself, weren't you? And if you don't fit at a certain time, there's nothing you can do about it, is there?
Well, of course, I went to Cherry Red. I jumped ship to Cherry Red.
Yeah, what happened there then? Did you get dropped or did you just move on?
I didn't get dropped, but there was nothing happening. Again, you know, there was nothing, no studio sessions booked, no projected releases, you know, nothing. And we've got to like 1982 now, and 1982 was like a dead year with Factory for me. There was nothing. So going into 1983 with nothing, and no prospect of anything being recorded and released. And Tony had done his Stockholm Monsters Affections thing now to this club, the Hacienda, that hadn't opened yet. Everything was Hacienda. And I thought, well, he's never going to take any notice of me now. I've slipped totally off the radar. You know, the Hacienda is going to be the thing. Understandably, as history sort of shows it now, though the Hacienda wasn't a great success early on, was it? Apparently it was empty a lot of nights. I never went there. I was due to do a gig there once with Section 25 and The Wake, when they'd have had Bobby Gillespie on the drums. And it was the night before my birthday, and I remember going to my mum, I'm not going to that gig in Manchester. I'm not going to wake up the next morning, no idea where I'm going to be or stay or anything. I'm not going to wake up on my birthday in Manchester all miserable and alone. And I thought, I'm not doing that gig. I wish I'd have done it now. I mean, there was a lot of cosmic things happening that night, you know, like Karen Carpenter died, you know, and it was my birthday. I missed the Section 25 Wake gig at the Hacienda. So you can tell there's a massive cosmic spiral there of destiny and fate. I love Karen, by the way. That's not meant disrespectful. Mm-hmm. But it was... I went to Cherry Red. I had a bit of contact there with John Hollingsworth there. And they were interested, and they put up the money, let me do an album, let me do a single. And again, it was all done a bit wrong. I had a very inexperienced, very good guy producing, but he was very inexperienced, David, who produced the album. And I was just sort of with an electric guitar mostly, singing these very harsh, spiky songs, very undercooked, undeveloped, and with some lyrics I regret now. And I look back, and everything you could do wrong, I did wrong. and the press were mostly not on my side. They either ignored me or castigated me. And also, you see, I remember getting reviews of the Factory Quartet. And at that time, there were loads of music papers and magazines. It's perhaps hard to understand anybody now, but how many weeklies were there? There was NME, Melody Maker, Disc, Record Mirror, and there were obviously things like Smash Hits and probably things I've forgotten. But I remember getting about 10 different magazines and papers with reviews of Factory Quartet. 10, literally going to a newsagents and buying all these things because I knew the reviews were in. And they were all bad for me. Every review was bad. So you get all this national press saying Kevin Hewick is crap. Kevin Hewick is a laughingstock. And it played on my mind. I mean, eventually I had a breakdown. I'm not saying the British music press of the early 1980s gave me a nervous breakdown. I can't blame it on them, and entirely. But you know what I'm saying. And also, the audiences were mostly very negative. By that time, they'd got a post-punk thing of you're supposed to throw things and spit at punk gigs, and you're supposed to, be aggressive, and so it all played on my mind. I mean, obviously the flaws were inherent within me, but I ended up having a total breakdown. That's how it ended up. And again, I don't mean that as some sort of sob story, feel sorry for me or anything, but that's what happened.
It was cruel, one of the music press, the music media, the whole system at the time, wasn't it?
Well, writers were encouraged to be, I think, kind of clever. You look at some of the writing then, it hasn't worn well. It hasn't worn well at all. And people put things also, that also go into bizarre sidelines. You'd read a review and it'd tell you nothing about the band or the music. The writer would be sort of showing off something. And you would have a load of tangents that had nothing to do with the music or what was happening that night or on that record. It was baffling, and I had things like that. And even a sympathetic write-up. I had a write-up in the Melody Maker, and we met in this little coffee bar in St Pancras that did donuts. And there's Helen Fitzgerald, who's a lovely person. And Helen was on my side, but she put this jokey stuff about between mouthfuls of donuts, Kevin said, and as he tucked into his fifth donut, which was just not true, I did not eat 5 donuts. But the thing is, it's in the national press. And people are reading it, and what impression do they get, even if they bother to read it at all? Is this guy scoffing donuts through an interview, which just didn't happen.
How did you cope with this? How did you still manage to make music after all this period? Was it just something that you were driven to do? It's just inside you, despite the odds, you still have to make the music.
Well, you've got quite a complicated timeline, because really factories like late 79 to 82, then 82 to 84 is Cherry Red. And fair enough, Cherry Red did put up some money, did release some records. They didn't sell well, on that level of looking things in a cold analytical way. Fair enough, Cherry Red gave me a shot and we tried and it didn't work. There's all sorts of reasons for that. But I certainly do say Cherry Red gave me a fair enough crack of, the whip or whatever you want to say. But then afterwards, I gave up music for years. Real guitars gathering dust in the corner of the bedroom and nothing, no gigs, nothing. But then I did feel it come back to me again. I did want to write songs. And I was very naive then. By then, we're getting to like the late 80s, early 90s. By the time I felt like I had some songs and I had something, I think, much better than what I did in the Factory Cherry Red era, I was contacting all those people again, even Tony Wilson and stuff. But of course, times had changed. A music publisher who will remain nameless, who published my stuff in the early 80s, I called him about a tape I'd sent him and I said, "What do you think?" And he says, "Oh, Kevin, times have changed." He says, "We've got gold discs on the wall from Everything But the Girl." Yeah. And he says, "Times have changed." So I thought, oh, I obviously can't match the gold discs from Everything But the Girl, you know. Anyway, that was Martin Costello, who will remain nameless. Thank you, Martin, for that. I come off that phone call feeling like, you know, you must have had phone calls in your life, John, where you feel like you've been through the ringer, you know, yeah. Really, really bad. I've had a few of those in my time where you used to hang up the phone in the days of the landline, and you hang up the phone and your tail is between your legs, you know, and that just a lot of doors that used to be open were closed. Tony rang me once. This was, you know, in the 90s, and he was really positive, seemed very happy with his new wife and his kids and things, and he seemed really positive. It was the last time I ever spoke to him. I wish I'd have had the chance to speak to him again, you know, nearer the time. But yeah. I did try to contact him near the end of his life, but I got nothing back. I remember emailing him and sent out the email and got no response back, whatever. I mean, I know when he was well, you'd have found him easily in Manchester, but I didn't go back to Manchester for so many years. I think between 1982 and 2006, I never went to Manchester. It was 24 years before I went to Manchester again. So, you know, the timeline of these things is so funny because, you know, some of it's not such a great expanse of time, and some of it is. I mean, I'm 63 now. I can't believe it. And COVID is ironic to me personally. It just has had a massive impact on everybody and on everything in the arts and culture, including music. The personal impact to me is ironic because I was doing a lot. I was doing a lot of not as much as I would wish to, but I was gigging quite a bit, and it had got interesting. You know, I'm able now to do a show. I'm a real evening with. Give me a guitar and some sort of amplification, and I can give you the 2-3 hour show. You know, probably have people's heads on the tables by the end of it. But I can do an evening with Kevin Hewick or an afternoon. An afternoon's better.
Yeah.
So I can do a full show now, and I can play a lot of songs over the years, and I've kept writing. I've never stopped writing, and of course now I've done quite a few albums. You know, I've been quite prolific in the last decade. I've done 5 albums in the last decade, and a couple of them are quite long albums as well. They're what would be double vinyl albums. I've not done anything vinyl myself. It's very difficult now to know what to do when you've done an album. What do you do? You want to do these vinyl and everything, and it's sales, you know. And I've lost thousands of pounds rather than made them. I always say, I mean, I call my record label Botheration I thought it was kind of a Billy Bunter, very English word. But it's sort of like Toad of Toad Hall sort of thing. I think it is a Billy Bunter thing. I'm not sure. I think, you can imagine them saying it in the old public school. But botheration, I mean, I've bought out CDs and obviously stuff's on streaming, but bringing out vinyl as well I'd love to, but it's the cost. I always say about botheration is we spend thousands of pounds to make hundreds, which is true.
Sums up the music business, doesn't it?
Didn't catch that.
It sums up the music business, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. You spend pounds to make hundreds, and no doubt people spend millions to make thousands. That is exactly what it's like. And gigging is great to do, but it's very difficult to even break even. I do too many. Well, I was doing too many gigs. I mean, obviously it's died a death now. I was doing perhaps too many gigs around my locality, but nonetheless, around Leicester area, if you wanted to see me, there were plenty of chances. But getting a bit further afield, another thing I'm going to say is obviously there's a huge amount of music that goes on, especially in the more acoustic end of things. The media and stuff, the mainstream media, I'm going to sound like Donald Trump now, the mainstream media ignores it. But, there's a whole world of folk music and so on that doesn't get any national press, and a whole set of venues and immense amount of activity that doesn't get noticed. It's very different now with the internet era, though I always say I'm a 20th century person in a 21st century world. I mean, this is only the third time I've been on Zoom. So even Zoom, I'm a bit like, what do I do? What do I do? I was sending messages, John, what do I do? Don't think I'm ignoring you if you don't hear back from me. I was quite worried about us connecting.
Yeah. Well, we got there. Even the 20th
century. Not talking about you're me, John. You're more than me. You do all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, one thing I might vaguely impress you with here is that I've gone vegan.
Oh,
I've been vegan in March. I've been vegetarian. 1991 I stopped eating meat, and 2001 I stopped eating fish. And then I could never break the habit with dairy. And I never thought I could, but I have. I've done it. I've done it in my way, but I've done it.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's really good. So you can make positive changes as you get older. I mean, it's not just something you do when you're young, is it?
Well, also, obviously, I am in my 60s, and I have some of the ailments you expect of somebody in their 60s. I'm diabetic, type 2. I've known that since 2005, but I've also got kidney disease. I don't feel a thing of the kidney disease, but I've got it. I don't feel anything, but it's there. And I found out the other week, I'm very excited about this. I've got osteoarthritis. I've got neuropathy going on in my hands and feet. All these things affect you. I mean, I'm injecting and taking loads of tablets now. And so I've gone vegan. Maybe it's too late, but you think I've not touched any alcohol for 2.5 years, and I was a big drinker. Drink was always a prop to me. And that was a positive change. I miss it, but I am more excited about a cup of tea or coffee now than about beer and stuff. I did my hair, up to the age of between 15 and 61, I did my share of drinking, and I kind of have to accept that it's over now. maybe this Christmas I'll lapse. I doubt it, but I haven't lapsed. So, but
Yeah.
I have stopped drinking it. So I kind of feel like I've become like a Buddhist monk, shaven head, vegan, no alcohol. I'm as pure as a Buddhist monk. No insult to Buddhist monks. I always think I'm offending somebody if you say something these days.
There's always a bit of that in the Factory, wasn't there? I remember people like Paul Wigan, he was into his Buddhism. A lot of the characters around Factory had shaved heads and Buddhism traits, didn't they, at the time?
Section 25, and you realise, of course, style matters with bands and things. So I remember Section 25 doing the ICA with them in like the summer of 1980, and there was the three of them with shaven heads, and Larry went on about Buddhism as well, and I really felt this vibe with them, you know, and they look like a kind of Buddhist monks with guitars and drums, you know. It was very affecting, and now I've gone that way as well. I'm afraid my hair I decided on that a long time ago. I was called Baldy at school. People used to make fun of me at school because I had a big bald patch, and I grew my hair down here.
Mm-hmm.
I literally it down to my belly, you know, but it lasts, as you can see. I miss it. I sometimes think I would have it right down there still if I had it, but it's gone.
So what's the future plans then to keep making music somehow?
I've got an album I finished actually last year. It's a really good album, though. Obviously I would say that, but I didn't get it out last year or this year. I'm going to be honest. I went through a major dip. My dad died last year, and I was very close to him. And he had dementia in the last couple of years of his life, and I was effectively his carer. I ended up having to get help in, and he did go into a really good home the last couple of months of his life. But it had a huge effect on me. The whole thing, that whole dementia journey I shared with him. And when he passed away, just a huge thing went from my life. And for that and all the other usual tedious reasons, I do struggle with depression a lot. I'll be honest about that. You know, it's just a fact that I do. And so this album has been as such finished. We're endlessly doing the artwork. I do the artwork. Well, I don't do the artwork. I say things and he makes them possible. A great guy called Jim Tetlow does my designs. And Jim is very patient, a lovely man. He's very Zen Buddhist monk-like, though he has got the hair down here. And my instructions to Jim go on and on and on about this album cover. In fact, we've been taking more and more away.
What's always a trick in it with arts? It's what you don't put in.
Well, in a way, but I always feel I have to explain a lot, like lyrics, because I don't have the luxury of being like a major artist. Or I envy people like Dylan. Bob Dylan could bring something out in a brown paper bag, and because it's Bob Dylan, it'd be analysed and would look at the lyrics and, you know, what does it mean, and write huge essays about it. But they weren't about me, so I have to impart information, you know, because I always feel like I've got to explain things, and maybe also I've got burned so many times. Maybe that 80s experience has stayed with me. That I felt like I got humiliated quite a few times, or I humiliated myself, or whichever way you see it. And I'm very self-conscious about it. And I want to say these things, and I want to really be open, like I've just said now, about things like depression and drinking and being diabetic and all this. I hope about it. I always call myself the transparent man. I feel like I'm totally transparent, yet you can never be totally transparent. There's always something that you've got to reveal or you've got to hide or whatever. But I try to be open about all these things, and in being open, obviously you've got to perhaps have a thicker skin than I have. You know, I've learned now recently. I've only learned this recently. This is how stupid I am. You know, like political things, like on Twitter or something. I've learned, I think, better now to walk away. You know, like what you said about saying less is more on an album cover. Sometimes you get into these things, particularly about, you know, politics and so on, and you realize it's a dogfight that's going to go on, spiraling on, round and round and round. And it's best to walk away at some point. You've said what you believe, you've said what you think is the truth and is honest, and it's sometimes best to walk away or not even step into it at all. It's been difficult for me personally, and I mean a lot of other people, because of what happened last election, and because I joined the Labour Party because of Corbyn. You know, that's the C word. I've said the C word, John. because of Corbyn. And I don't see him as a saint or anything perfect. I met him a couple of times. I gave him my albums. I don't think he played them. A big mistake. But anyway, but the thing is, you know, what's being said and happening at the minute about the Labour Party, you know, is really heartbreaking compared to the optimism and hope that we had a while ago. Though the last election felt bad before it even happened. You know, it felt badly timed and it didn't feel right. It didn't have the vibe of the 2017 election at all, because there was a real hope then, and it did come darn close.
Yes.
I mean, now they feel like the chance is gone. It's getting further and further away again.
The Brexit thing was, it just wrecked it for him really, because he was Brexit, and all the young people thought he was Remain, and when they found that out, I think there was no going back. Yeah.
Brexit's one of those things again where nobody can win. Nobody can win. It wasn't right before, it wasn't right after, you know, and it's divided the country a lot more, and I'm afraid it's the way the media is as well. People more openly racist again. It's made things that happened in the 70s kind of come back. I know they never went away, but it's brought them back. It's sent us back quite a lot of steps. I take it you edit all this.
Yeah, well, I'll probably take this bit off the end, and we'll just keep the music stuff on there. It's probably best.
Wondering. And also, they're very difficult issues. They're very difficult.
Complex. Issues. It's a complex world.
I know people of all different shades of opinion. And also, I've got things like, I want to say things on like Facebook and stuff, and when I say them, I know there's particular people who will react, and I'm fed up actually of having the endless debate with them. I'm tired. Probably a lot of people feel tired at the moment, and this bizarre thing has happened with COVID that has affected so much. Again, really, Brexit and COVID. You know what? You just said those two words less than a decade ago. You'd gone Brexit, COVID, and people would have looked at what? I would have looked blank. What's a Brexit? What's COVID? And now look at it. You would have been completely baffled. What does that mean? And when you were told what it means, you wouldn't have thought the effect it would have on the country and on the world. It's very worrying about music though, because the infrastructure, all the staff, everything from bar staff to sound and lighting crews to people in small venues, who literally do everything, who make the tea, literally,
Yeah.
I venues in Leicester. I've got quite a connection with a couple of venues, like the Musician in Leicester, and it's a small kind of family-run unit. I mean, literally, it is a family, and there are a couple of other people, and everything's done really on 4 or 5 people in this whole venue. That has a stage, that has lighting, that has a sound system, has a bar, and everything's done by a handful of people. And now it's been closed down most of the year with a very uncertain future.
Let's hope there's some kind of bounce back then, isn't it? Yeah.
We're going to have Section 25 there in September. We had it booked ahead. We postponed it in the end, but we don't know where to put it to. Vin, do you know what Vin Cassidy said? He said, "Why we've been doing things like Sunday afternoon shows, which have been lovely, a lovely time to do it, and everybody goes home in time for whatever, they get home by 7 o'clock, the show's over, and we have a nice afternoon. And we were going to do a Sunday afternoon matinee show with Section 25, and Vince said, what about February the 14th? Do Valentine's Day.
Yes, good idea. Yeah. Concept gig. Yeah.
We don't know where the epidemic. I said people are doing all Valentine-y things, and like if I go to Section 25, the missus will kill me, kind of. And those sorts of gigs, you rely on people travelling. It's not just people from Leicester. People come from Derby and Nottingham and Coventry and so on. We're in that distance range. And now, if you put on a show, people travel, and you've got to have a time that's good for them, a date that's good for them to get to you and everything. And now we don't know what to do. What's happened with Membranes then? I know you've had an album out recently.
Yeah, it's a couple of years ago. We're just plotting back end of 21, really. Because I think there will be some kind of gigs then with the vaccines and testing starting to make an impact. So it is possibilities then.
Think of you with your choir gigs. You'd have been COVID super spreaders.
I know. I know. You have to wait this period out, really. And I think
how big were the choirs that you did the gigs with? How many people?
Well, we can do them with 3-piece up to about 20. So it depends on the gigs, because we're not big enough to get away with it in big theatres. But if we could do big theatres, it'd be great. But it works. It sounds great. But even with 3 people, you can make it good. In fact, when we did the European tour, we just took a woman singer to sing the parts, and that worked as well. So it just gives it a different dynamic, really, a different texture.
Love women's voices. I love the female voice, and a woman can carry so much.
Yeah, and it's contrast, isn't it? And it breaks away from just being that blokey band thing as well, which is good as well. Yeah.
And about women's voices, I've worked with a great singer called, her name is fantastic, and she looks fantastic as well, Autumn Dawn Leader. Right. She's an American, lives in Loughborough. She looks like something out of Game of Thrones. She's all piercings and tattoos, and she looks fantastic. And the name Autumn Dawn Leader, it isn't a stage name, it's really her name. Autumn. Hey? It sounds warrior princess, doesn't it? And she looks like a princess. Well, she sung with me, and I love singing with her, and our 2 voices together, it's wonderful. It's magic.
That's a dynamic, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. The contrast is so great, and the kind of spiritual feeling, isn't it? Resonance,